Well, today it's raining outside, and folks don't like it when my lens gets all speckled up with water, so I thought I'd do a video inside. It's October. We'll be probably lighting this wood stove here in the next few days, if not a week. It's supposed to get down into the 40s. We'll probably light it up. Now, I want to address something that's very important. I know for a fact that I am not a prepper. I've said this many times that I'm not a prepper. I'm a guy that lives off grid and living his dreams, but I've never seen a prepper actually do a video in front of a wood stove, and most of the preppers that I watch, I don't even think have a wood stove. I think there's one that I watch that does. Everybody else that I watch that has a wood stove is either a homesteader or an off-gridder. Preppers apparently are so tough. Rawr, I'm going to show you how to survive the SHTF. They don't need a wood stove because cold doesn't bother them. But cold bothers me, so I'm going to have a wood stove. I have 15 years worth of firewood. It's oak and hickory. I say that 3 years ago I had 15 years worth of firewood. I suspect it'll last till I'm 65 years old. Somebody's going to say, of course, that you can't keep firewood for 15 years. It'll rot. You can keep oak and hickory for 15 years. It won't rot. If you keep it stacked up, keep it so the water drains off, it'll do fine. When we moved here, there was a pile of firewood down in the woods that had been here since at least the 90s. Burned great. It was dry. When I say dry, it's in the context of moisture content inside the firewood, meaning it's not green. On these new EPA wood stoves, which I'm going to talk about the EPA quite a bit in this video, you have to burn dry firewood. So what you do is you can get yourself a moisture tester. And the moisture tester has two little probes right here on the top and a digital readout. You can buy these for like 20 bucks off Amazon or Home Depot. Just type in wood moisture tester. It has two settings, one for construction and then one for firewood. It comes with a long list of instructions that tell you what setting to put it on for different firewoods. So what you do is you split your firewood. After you get it split, then you put your probes into that piece that was split. So you want to split your firewood down the center and then check it down the center. Oak and hickory take 2 to 3 years. The first year I was here, it was difficult to keep this wood stove lit. These new EPA wood stoves have several things going for it that make it an absolute fantastic wood stove to use. It burns the smoke. And the way it does it is it has these reburners in here. Now there's two types of reburners. You can get one that has a catalytic converter, or you can get one with these air tubes. Now the catalytic converter is much more expensive and uses precious metals for the reburn. The reason it's important that you're burning the smoke is that's firewood. The smoke is wood particles going up the chimney. So if you're burning all of the firewood, you're getting a good deal of efficiency out of your wood stove. It's really pretty to watch this. Can't capture it in the video. For some reason, the spectrum of light colors, I guess, just doesn't show up, but it's a beautiful blue. And it just dances, and right at the top of the wood stove just dances. Kind of a ghostly image, I guess is the best way to put it. What happens is these reburners get really hot from the fire below it, and then when the smoke hits it, it explodes in this beautiful blue flame. The reason it's called air tubes, because your ventilation, only a little bit comes through this ventilation port. The majority of your air is coming through this air tube. I've got 3 air tubes in this particular wood stove. Some of them have 2. I'm not sure if any of them have 1. Now you can get a hybrid wood stove. The catalytic converter is more expensive. These are pretty cheap. And the catalytic converter, usually the manufacturer wants to install it themselves. At least the one I looked at, they did. That air is being pulled in through the tubes. So if you have wet firewood, the air tubes aren't working correctly. So that smoke builds up. You get a black tar on the window of your wood stove. If you have dry firewood at 20% or less, this won't turn black. It'll get a dust on it. You can wipe it off with your hand. But that black tar is wood particles with water in it, and it's very flammable. Dry firewood comes up here to the smoke and hits that and catches on fire. But if it's wet, it can't catch on fire. It's wet. So what it does is goes up in your chimney and your glass and sticks there. The problem with that is it's called creosote. A lot of people will remember back in the olden days, they used to use creosote for railroad ties. They may still do that, but that's what they use. I guess it's the same thing. So it sticks inside there and becomes very flammable. I think it can ignite at 500 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a long time since I looked. So if you get a spark that comes up, hits that, it'll catch on fire. And you'll see it on Facebook every year. Somebody say, why is my chimney red? Well, it's red because it's on fire. I've cleaned this several times in the last couple of years, and nothing comes out of it since I've been using dry firewood. Now, the first year we were here, we didn't have a choice. We had to burn wet firewood. And we had 2 chimney fires. One was inside the chimney, as I said. And what I did was when I opened the door, I could hear it go. So I shut the door again, shut the vent, and it died. Then I opened it back up, it caught on fire again, shut it. So what I was trying to do was throttle the flame inside the chimney so it wouldn't glow red. And I was successful. What that did was it burned out all that creosote in there. So it became a powdery substance. Then you can just take your chimney cleaner and run it up and down the chimney, and all that dust falls down. The second fire I had was the chimney cap, the stuff that keeps the birds and everything out of it. It had built up a creosote and it caught on fire. The other thing is if we didn't have a metal roof, it could be very dangerous. The tar will drip down onto the metal roof. Well, if you get a spark on there, it just catches your roof on fire. So it was pretty dangerous, and I wouldn't recommend burning wet firewood, the 20%. Now, there's a second type of wet firewood. So if this gets wet from rain, it will dry, and it'll dry within a few hours to a week. Just bring it in, set it down, it'll dry. Now, a lot of people say, oh, just set it on the wood stove. This 20% or higher, they'll say, put it on the wood stove, dries out. It doesn't dry out. That is a myth. What it does is catch on fire on top of the wood stove. I've tried it. It's dangerous. Don't do it. But as far as bringing it in, setting it next to the stove like this, and somebody's going to say, ain't that going to catch on fire? No, I have this laser thermometer that I use, and I keep very close eye on what's going on. See, do a little Jean-Luc Picard. And so I just come down here and I test it and see what it is. It's not even close to being flammable. I mean, yeah, it gets warm. What you do want to be careful of is if you open the door, sparks don't fly out on top of it. These new modern EPA wood stoves, there are a lot of people that hate them. And the reason they hate them is because they're trying to use them like it's 30-year-old technology. This is not your grandma and grandpa's wood stove. This is an amazing wood stove, and we can criticize that it's the EPA's wood stove, but whoever did it did a fantastic job. So you light the fire, and the flames will last in there no longer than 2 hours. It stays warm for about 8 hours. What we do is we light it up when it's about 68 degrees in the house. Temperature get up about 90. Now remember, we live in a tiny house, so it puts out a lot of heat. Somebody will say, you need a smaller wood stove. No, you need to put less wood in the wood stove. When it's really cold, I like to put more wood in the wood stove when it gets down below 0. So when it's warmer out, like in the fall, in October, you put less wood in it. So what Carolyn's been doing is she's been splitting up our firewood even into smaller pieces. Depending on the time of year and how much firewood you put in it, the heat from this keeps us warm for about 8 hours. Like, let it get down to 65, gets up to 90, and then all day long the temperature in the house is dropping down back down to 60, well, about 68, 67 degrees. And you relight it. And I only have to relight it on a normal winter day 2 to 3 times. But then when it gets really cold, we light it probably about 4 times. I always talk about the EPA banning wood stoves. And people say, oh, they'll never ban the wood stoves as long as you're a government shill and all that stuff. It just drives me insane. There are people that do not know how to make their own wood stoves. Buying wood stoves on eBay or something, there are some states that won't let you do it. Oregon and Washington, you have to buy a brand new wood stove. You cannot install a used wood stove into your home. So that means you have to have it installed by a professional. Watch one channel where they didn't install it correctly. They didn't have an intake, air intake into their shed was what it was. And they wouldn't pass him until he had the air intake. So imagine, if you don't have the air intake in correctly, you're really going to have to be careful on what you're doing. How much distance from the wall. You can see I use these metal sheets from the wall. There's an inch gap in between the wall and the metal sheet. It keeps a nice air cool in there. It's kind of amazing. A lot of people just seem to think that since the EPA says they have to use these, they're not going to use them. They're just going to be anti-government. Well, I think that's a mistake. This thing saves your back on wood stoves. Whether it's EPA or not, it saves your back. You don't have to use near as much. We only use about a cord a year. 3 truckloads, and I have a small truck, it's little 4-cylinders. It's 3 truckloads. Now, granted, I live in a tiny house, but if you live in a normal size house, you may use 4 cords, and that's a regular cord, not a rip cord and all that stuff, just a regular cord of wood. Folks who don't want to follow the EPA regulations because they're anti-government, what happens is there are people in the world that believe wood stoves are dangerous, cause asthma, causes problems to the environment, so they have just as much of a vote as you do. You want your freedoms, but they want to take it away from you. So what happens is you go into a municipality and you install a wood stove, you're going to teach everybody a lesson. And then you smoke out your neighbor's house. They call up the city mayor and say, hey, John next door smoking me out of my house with his wood stove. So next city council meeting, they ban wood stoves. They see you lighting the wood stove, smoke's billowing out of the chimney. I'm going to be anti-government, which I'm fine with, really. I'm not that big of a fan of government myself. But the problem is now they send out the code enforcement or somebody. They'll send somebody out and then tell you shut it down. And then they ban them in the area and nobody can have a wood stove. And, well, what fun's that? I wanted a wood stove and you just made it illegal for me to have one. The other problem is the EPA is making this more difficult. Each year they require more and more regulations. When this one was made, it had to be 85% efficient. Now, my interpretation of that isn't correct, but here's how I interpret it just to make it easy conversation. 85% of the material that's going into it is being burned up and used for heat. And then, so that means that you got 15% going up the chimney. Well now, just a few years later, I think it's 95%. So that means the manufacturers of the wood stove have to do more and more and more, causing the prices to go up and up and up. Meaning more and more people are not going to be able to afford it, which is the goal. They don't want you buying these. This is a wood pro, but they don't even make wood pros anymore. They had to go out of business because it became too difficult to build them, but they don't sell these. They sell the components. I had to buy a window. Boy, that was tough to get it through Wood Pro. I ended up getting an aftermarket one, which, like I said, the goal is to outprice them, where only the rich can have them. Folks who actually need them, like you and me, you're not going to be able to buy them. I bought this one used. Of course, I don't live in Washington, Oregon, so that was good news. And I think I got it for $400. It had only been used once. And I was sure that the guy was telling me the truth. He actually recrated it in the original crate. But like I said, I think it was $2,600 for a similar model last year. It was probably $2,200 for the year that we wanted to buy it. So you can see the prices are going up each year. There are people who want to make their own wood stoves. And more power to you. I mean, if you have that capability, great. The problem is, once again, the EPA knows you're doing this. And they don't want you doing this. So they're going to make sure that for your sin, somebody else is going to have to pay for it. I know that there's one couple on YouTube that want to get a wood stove and it's going to cost them $10,000 to get it installed. I use some unconventional materials. Down here I use little blocks that you can line your sidewalk up with. Bought those at Home Depot. That seemed to work out really well. I used the tin instead of having this particle board that they use just for wood stoves. I forget what it's called. Doesn't matter. I'm not telling you how to build one. So I was able to take some shortcuts and it was a lot cheaper. I think those were like $8 a sheet, so that wasn't very expensive at all. I lined the ceiling up with it, the whole ceiling up with this metal. Now you'll notice that I don't have one of those flapper valve vents there. And somebody will say, you gotta have one of those, otherwise all the heat goes out the chimney. No, heat rises. You have to understand that. It's basic physics. Heat rises. It doesn't matter what you're putting in there. Heat's going to go up through it. It's just, if you don't have insulation in your ceiling, heat goes right out of it. So no, it's not preventing the heat from going up. What you're doing is you're restricting the airflow. It is against federal regulations to put a vent in this. Installs it, he's going to have to install it without that because code enforcement is going to come in and say, hey, you can't have that. And the reason is, once again, these air vents. You want those air vents burning that smoke. If you're shutting off air, smoke billows in there, and you're wasting the efficiency of the wood stove. Well, you need wet firewood so it doesn't burn as fast. Something like 70% of the energy in the wood stove is being used to burn that water. You're wasting energy. If you would just burn this really hot, get it up to 90 degrees and let it cool off, you're going to save a ton of firewood. you're wasting energy. You're wasting your back. If you're burning wet firewood and 70% of it is being used to burn off the water, that is a waste of labor. But again, it's because people are using old mindsets with new technology. If you want to use that idea, maybe you shouldn't be watching YouTube videos, because 30 years ago, with the same mindset you had 30 years ago with wood stoves, there was no YouTube. So you can go back to your telephone. I guess they had some internet back. You're not learning anything on YouTube if you're just going to do it the same way. I've been burning firewood 30 years. You're wrong, sir. No, I read the instructions and been doing this a long time, and this thing is an amazing wood stove. My grandparents and my parents both burned wood. So if you click this up next box, it'll take you to a video where I was talking about the EPA just banned, boy, they're at it again, clean water. So hope I can inspire you to think smart, so you don't have to work so hard when you're living your dreams. Thanks for watching.